There is something strangely comforting about learning history at night. The world becomes quieter. The lights become softer. And the people who lived hundreds of years ago begin to feel a little closer. Tonight, we're going to travel back to medieval Europe. But we are not going to follow kings into battle. We are not going to count the castles they built. And we are not going to worry about who won the next war. Instead, we are going to explore something much quieter. Something ordinary. Something deeply human. Beauty. What did medieval people think was beautiful? What kind of face would make someone stop and look? What kind of hair was considered attractive? Why did some women remove hair from their foreheads? Why could pale skin be a sign of wealth? And why did clothing sometimes matter almost as much as the person wearing it? These questions take us into a world that was very different from ours. A world of stone houses, wooden streets, candlelight, wool clothing, handwritten books, small mirrors, herbal preparations, and long evenings without electricity. So for the next little while, imagine that the modern world has disappeared. Put away the phone. Forget the traffic. Forget the bright screens. And imagine a medieval town becoming quiet after sunset. The market stalls have closed. The merchants have gone home. The animals have settled down. A few candles are burning behind small windows. Somewhere inside one of those houses, a young woman is preparing herself for the night. Perhaps she is sitting beside a small table. Perhaps her hair has been carefully combed. Perhaps she is removing a head covering. Perhaps she is looking at her reflection. The reflection is not perfectly clear. There is no modern mirror. No bright bathroom light. No camera. Only a faint image produced by a polished surface. She cannot zoom in. She cannot take a photograph. She cannot compare herself with thousands of strangers online. She simply looks. And what she sees is judged according to the standards of her own world. Those standards are not the same as ours. But they're not completely different either. Because medieval people, just like people today, noticed faces. They noticed hair. They noticed clothing. They noticed skin. They noticed the way someone walked. They noticed whether a person looked healthy, wealthy, young, elegant, or respectable. Beauty was never just beauty. It was also information. A world without the modern mirror. Today, it is almost impossible to imagine a life without constant reflections. You can see yourself whenever you want. In a bathroom mirror, in a shop window, on a smartphone, on a video call. Even when you are not looking for a reflection, one can appear unexpectedly. Medieval people lived very differently. Mirrors existed, but they were not ordinary household objects for everyone. Good quality mirrors could be expensive. Their reflective surfaces were not necessarily as clear and reliable as modern glass. For many ordinary people, seeing their own face in detail was not something they could do whenever they wanted. Think about how strange that would feel. You would know what other people looked like. You could recognize your family. You could recognize your neighbors. You could recognize a stranger approaching you in the street. But your own face would be much harder to study. You would know it through memory, through touch, through the reactions of other people, and occasionally through a reflection. This changes the relationship people have with appearance. Today, a person can spend 10 minutes examining a tiny detail on their face. A medieval person might never have seen that detail clearly. There were no high-definition cameras. There were no selfies. There were no beauty filters. And there was certainly no endless stream of carefully edited faces appearing on a screen. Beauty was therefore experienced more socially. If people told you that you were attractive, you believed them. If someone admired your hair, you knew it. If people complimented your clothing, you remembered it. And if someone criticized your appearance, you probably remembered that too. The meaning of pale skin. Now, let us move to one of the most interesting medieval beauty ideals. Pale skin. Today, ideas about skin tone and beauty vary enormously around the world. But in medieval European society, pale skin could sometimes carry a particular social meaning. It could suggest that someone was not spending long days working outdoors. Imagine a farmer working beneath the sun. The work is physical. The fields are open. There is no modern sunscreen. There is no air-conditioned tractor. The person spends hours outside. Over time, the skin becomes exposed to sunlight. Now imagine a wealthy noblewoman. Her daily life may be very different. She might spend more time indoors. She might travel in covered vehicles. She might have servants who perform physically demanding tasks. She might not need to spend hours working beneath the sun. Her pale complexion could therefore become a visible reminder of privilege. It quietly communicated something. I do not have to work outside. I have resources. I have servants. I have time. In this way, skin could become a social signal. The interesting thing is that beauty standards are often connected to economics. A feature that looks beautiful may also reveal something about the life a person lives. Pale skin was not simply about color. It could represent leisure. And leisure was a luxury. The desire to look even paler. Once pale skin became desirable in certain circles, people naturally began looking for ways to emphasize it. This is where medieval cosmetics become interesting. People experimented with different powders, preparations, and substances. Some were intended to improve the appearance of the skin. Others were used to create a smoother or lighter-looking complexion. But the medieval understanding of chemistry was very different from ours. People did not have modern dermatologists explaining exactly what each ingredient might do to the skin. A substance could be recommended because someone had used it before. A recipe could be passed from one person to another. A beauty preparation could appear in a manuscript, and because it was written down, people might assume that it was trustworthy. But written instructions did not make something safe. Some historical cosmetics contained substances that could irritate or damage the body. The desire to appear beautiful could therefore lead people into uncomfortable or even dangerous practices. That should sound familiar. Every period of history has had beauty treatments that seemed completely reasonable at the time. Some later turned out to be harmful. The medieval world was simply working with a much smaller amount of scientific knowledge. Hair was never just hair. Now think about hair. It seems like one of the simplest parts of a human body. But throughout history, hair has carried enormous social meaning. In medieval Europe, women's hair could be associated with femininity, youth, modesty, and beauty. Long hair could be admired. But the way it was displayed mattered. A young unmarried woman might sometimes show more of her hair. A married woman might be expected to cover it. Religious customs could also influence hairstyles and head coverings. And so, a simple piece of fabric could communicate information about a woman's place in society. A veil was not necessarily just an accessory. A head covering could tell people something about age, marital status, religious expectations, and respectability. It could transform the way a woman was perceived. Imagine walking through a medieval town. You do not know the people around you. You cannot look them up online. There are no identity cards hanging visibly around their necks. There are no social media profiles. But their clothing gives you clues. The shape of a hat, the quality of fabric, the color of a dress, the way hair is arranged, the presence of jewelry. All of these things communicate. Medieval society was full of visual signals. The beautiful golden hair. In medieval art, golden hair appears again and again. It can be seen in paintings, manuscripts, religious images, and romantic representations. Golden hair was not necessarily the most common hair color in medieval Europe. But artists were not always trying to create realistic portraits. They were creating ideals. Gold had powerful symbolic associations. It suggested sunlight, richness, brightness, purity, something precious. So, when an artist gave a beautiful woman long golden hair, the image could communicate much more than physical appearance. The hair itself became part of the message. It suggested that this woman was extraordinary. Perhaps she was noble. Perhaps she was pure. Perhaps she belonged to an idealized romantic world. Medieval art often worked this way. A beautiful person was not simply a person. They could represent an idea. The strange fashion of the high forehead. And now we arrive at one of the most unusual details. The forehead. During parts of the late medieval period, a high forehead could be considered attractive. The fashion was especially visible in some artistic representations. A woman might appear with a smooth, broad forehead and a hairline that seemed unusually high. Why? Because fashion had decided that this was elegant, and some women could remove hair from the front of the scalp to make the forehead appear larger. Imagine explaining this to someone today. They might say, "Wait, people wanted their hairline to look higher." Yes. In certain places and periods, that could be part of the desired appearance. This is one of the most useful reminders that beauty is not a law of nature. It changes. What seems attractive can be taught. A society can repeatedly show people a particular appearance. Artists can repeat it. Poets can describe it. Nobles can imitate it. And eventually, the style begins to feel natural. Until another generation decides that something else is beautiful. Eyebrows and the shape of the face. Eyebrows also mattered. In some medieval beauty traditions, thinner eyebrows could be preferred. Women could remove unwanted hairs to create a particular shape. Again, this was not universal. Medieval Europe was not one single culture. It stretched across enormous distances. Different kingdoms had different customs. Different centuries had different fashions. And ordinary people did not necessarily follow the same ideals as aristocrats. Still, the attention given to eyebrows tells us something. People have been modifying their faces for a very long time. Today, people use pencils, gels, wax, threading, and many other techniques. Medieval people had much simpler tools. But the basic idea was familiar. The natural face was not always considered the finished face. It could be adjusted, shaped, refined, improved, at least according to the fashion of the time, the ideal medieval face. So, if you gather together all of these ideas, what might the ideal medieval woman look like? There is no single answer. But some artistic traditions repeatedly show a combination of features. A youthful face, smooth, pale skin, a relatively high forehead, fine eyebrows, soft features, long hair, a small mouth, and an elegant posture. Yet we should be careful. Medieval paintings were not photographs. An artist was not necessarily recording exactly what a real woman looked like. A beautiful face in a manuscript might be deliberately simplified. The artist might be communicating youth or purity. A saint might be given flawless skin because perfection was part of the symbolism. A noble woman might be painted more beautifully than she actually appeared. The purpose of medieval art was often very different from modern portrait photography. So when we look at these images, we are not simply looking at medieval people. We are looking at medieval ideas about people. And that distinction is important. What about men? Men had beauty standards too. A medieval man could be judged by his face, hair, clothing, posture, and body. But male beauty was often connected with qualities such as strength, courage, youth, health, and social status. For nobles and warriors, appearance could be closely connected to reputation. A man was expected to look respectable. His clothing could communicate wealth. His horse could communicate wealth. His equipment could communicate wealth. His manners could communicate education. And his physical condition could communicate strength. A handsome medieval man was therefore not simply someone with a pleasing face. He could be expected to look capable, confident, healthy, well-dressed, and socially important. In other words, beauty and status were deeply connected. The importance of clothing. Now imagine a medieval woman walking into a crowded hall. Before she says a single word, people have already learned something about her. They can see her clothing. They can see the fabric. They can see the colors. They can see how much material has been used. They can see jewelry. They can see the quality of her head covering. They can see whether her clothing is plain or elaborate. All of these details tell a story. Clothing was expensive. Making fabric required enormous amounts of labor. Wool had to be collected and processed. Flax had to be prepared. Thread had to be produced. Cloth had to be woven. Dyes had to be prepared. And garments had to be sewn by hand. There were no modern factories producing thousands of identical dresses in a single afternoon. So clothing represented time, labor, money, and social position. A beautiful dress was therefore not just beautiful. It was expensive, and everyone understood that. Colors of wealth. Color could make the message even stronger. Some dyes were difficult to create. Some required imported materials. Others needed complicated processes. This meant that certain bright or rich colors could be expensive. A person wearing an impressive color could therefore attract attention. Imagine seeing someone in a crowded medieval marketplace wearing a richly dyed garment. You might immediately notice them. Their clothes could suggest that they were wealthy. Perhaps they belonged to a noble household. Perhaps they had access to expensive trade goods. Perhaps they were trying to look important. Color was not merely decoration. It could be a social signal. And in a world without logos or advertisements everywhere, clothing did some of the work that branding does today. Beauty and work. Perhaps the strongest connection between beauty and class was the difference between work and leisure. Imagine two women living in the same town. One spends much of her day working outdoors. She carries things. She cleans. She works with animals. She works with crops. She is physically active. Her hands may become rough. Her skin may be exposed to sunlight. Her clothing must be practical. Now imagine another woman from a wealthy household. She may spend much of her day indoors. She may have servants. She may spend time sewing, reading, praying, socializing, or arranging clothing. Her hands might remain softer. Her skin might remain lighter. Her clothing might be more delicate. The two women are living completely different lives. And the features that society calls beautiful may favor one lifestyle over the other. That is why beauty standards cannot be separated from society. Beauty is shaped by the world people live in. A quiet thought before we continue. And perhaps this is a good place to pause. Because when we look at medieval beauty from a modern perspective, it is easy to laugh. The high forehead, the strange cosmetics, the elaborate head coverings, the obsession with pale skin. But our own age has its own strange fashions. People spend enormous amounts of time changing their hair. They reshape eyebrows. They use cosmetics. They alter clothing. They follow trends that may look completely ordinary today, but could appear bizarre to someone living 500 years from now. Perhaps that is the real lesson. Beauty is always moving, always changing. always asking people to adjust themselves slightly, to become a little more fashionable, a little more elegant, a little more like the image society has decided to admire. And medieval people were simply living through their own version of that story. The candle continues to burn. The room remains quiet. Outside, the medieval street is almost empty. And somewhere, perhaps, another person is preparing for sleep. Tomorrow, the town will wake again. The market will open. The bells will ring. People will begin their work. And the complicated business of looking respectable and beautiful will begin all over again. But for now, there is nothing left to do. The night is quiet. The candle is low. And the medieval world can slowly disappear into the darkness. For a little while, at least, medieval beauty standards were stranger than you think. Boring history for sleep. Part 2. The night continues. The candle has become smaller now. Its flame moves gently whenever a little air enters through the wooden window. The room is quiet. And outside, the medieval town has almost disappeared into darkness. But beauty does not disappear simply because the sun has gone down. For medieval people, appearance was part of everyday life. It was present when they went to the market, when they attended church, when they visited friends, when they entered a noble household, and especially when they wanted to make a good impression. Because beauty was not simply about being attractive. It was about being acceptable, respectable, healthy, well-dressed, and, in some cases, wealthy. Tonight, we will continue slowly through this world. And perhaps the first thing we should explore is something that every person eventually had to deal with: cleanliness. How clean were medieval people? There is a popular image of medieval Europe as a place where nobody ever washed. According to this image, everyone was permanently dirty. Nobody cared about bathing. Nobody cared about smell. And people simply accepted the unpleasantness of everyday life. The reality was more complicated. Medieval people certainly understood cleanliness. They washed their hands. They washed their faces. They washed parts of their bodies. They cleaned clothing. They sometimes bathed in public bathhouses. And wealthy households could have much better access to bathing than poor ones. The difficulty was not necessarily that people disliked washing. The difficulty was resources. Water had to come from somewhere. Fuel had to be gathered. And heating water required work. Imagine wanting a warm bath today. You turn a handle. Water appears. You adjust the temperature. And within minutes, the bathtub is ready. A medieval person had no such convenience. Water might need to be carried from a well, would had to be gathered or purchased. A fire had to be built. Large containers had to be filled. And someone had to wait while the water became warm. Bathing was therefore an activity that required time and effort. For someone living in poverty, that effort could be significant. For someone wealthy, servants could perform much of the work. So cleanliness was partly a matter of social class. The medieval bathhouse. In some medieval cities, bathhouses were part of urban life. They could be places where people washed themselves, but they could also become social spaces. Imagine entering a busy bathhouse. The air is warm. Water is being carried around. People are talking. Steam rises. Someone is laughing. Someone is discussing business. Someone else is telling a story about a neighbor. It is not simply a place for washing. It is a gathering place. A little like the social spaces people use today. Of course, bathhouse traditions varied greatly across regions and centuries. Religious attitudes could also influence bathing habits. At different times and places, people debated what kind of bathing was appropriate. Some bathhouses became associated with excessive luxury. Others were viewed as ordinary parts of city life. Eventually, concerns about disease, morality, and social behavior affected bathhouse culture in different places. But the important point remains. Medieval people knew what a bath was, and they did not universally reject cleanliness. Clean clothing could matter more than you think. If bathing was difficult, clothing became especially important. Clean clothing could make someone feel cleaner even when bathing facilities were limited. Linen was particularly useful. It could be worn close to the skin and washed more easily than heavy outer garments. A person might change their linen while continuing to wear the same outer clothing. This meant that cleanliness was not necessarily about washing the entire body every day. It could also involve maintaining the parts of clothing that touched the body most closely. Imagine someone preparing for an important visit. They might put on cleaner linen, arrange their hair, wash their face and hands, adjust their clothing, add a pleasant fragrance, and suddenly they would appear much more polished. The process may sound simple, but in a medieval world, even simple things required effort. The problem of smell. Now imagine the smell of a medieval city. It would be difficult for modern people to understand. There were animals everywhere. Horses, cows, pigs, dogs. People would smoke. Food, wet soil, waste, leather, cloth, open drains, and crowded buildings. Modern sanitation systems did not exist in the form we know today, so unpleasant smells were simply part of urban life. This made pleasant fragrances particularly attractive. Perfume was not only about looking luxurious. It could also make someone more comfortable around others. Scented oils, flowers, herbs, and other fragrant materials could be used. A pleasant-smelling person might stand out in a crowded room. And just like clothing, fragrance could become a sign of wealth. Some perfumes required materials that were difficult to obtain. The ability to smell pleasant could therefore be another form of luxury. Roses, herbs, and fragrant water. Roses were admired for their scent and appearance. Rose water could be used in various ways. Herbs could also be valued for their fragrance. People might place aromatic plants in rooms. They could use scented preparations on the body. And fragrant substances could become part of household life. A few flowers have been placed nearby. The smell does not completely remove the reality of medieval life, but it makes the room more pleasant. In a world where strong smells were unavoidable, even a small amount of fragrance could feel special. The medieval beauty kit. Now imagine opening a small medieval container belonging to someone interested in appearance. It would not look like a modern makeup bag. There would be no dozens of plastic tubes. No compact powder with a mirror inside. No liquid foundation. No mascara wand. No setting spray. Instead, there might be small containers, powders, oils, herbs, combs, cloths, and other simple tools. The exact contents would depend on the person's wealth and location. A wealthy person could afford more specialized preparations. A poor person would rely on simpler methods. But the basic desire was recognizable. People wanted to improve their appearance. They wanted their skin to look healthy, their hair to look attractive, their clothing to look neat, and their body to smell pleasant. The modern beauty industry did not invent this desire. It simply found a new way to sell it. The importance of skin. Skin was especially important. Smooth skin could suggest youth. Healthy skin could suggest good living conditions. Pale skin could suggest leisure. And blemish-free skin could be associated with beauty. But medieval people had to deal with many of the same problems that people deal with today. Sun exposure, dry skin, infections, scars, acne, aging, and injuries. The difference was that they had much less understanding of what caused these problems. A person might try a traditional recipe because someone claimed it worked. Perhaps it involved herbs, perhaps oil, perhaps animal fat, perhaps some kind of powder. The treatment might help, or it might do nothing, or it might make things worse. There was no modern clinical testing system to settle the argument. Beauty knowledge traveled through tradition, and tradition could be remarkably persistent. Hair removal. Hair removal is another practice that seems very modern until we look into history. People have been removing unwanted hair for centuries. The reasons were different. Sometimes it was about fashion, sometimes hygiene, sometimes social expectations, sometimes religious ideas. Medieval people had various ways of dealing with unwanted hair. Plucking was one obvious method. It was slow, it could be uncomfortable, and it required patience. But patience was something medieval beauty routines often demanded. There was no quick 10-minute transformation. A person might spend considerable time preparing themselves. Beauty was sometimes a project. Hands and social status. Hands could also reveal someone's lifestyle. A person's hands might show whether they worked physically. Someone who spent their days doing hard manual labor could develop rough skin and calluses. A person from a wealthy household might have softer hands. This was not always true, but the distinction could be visible. And because medieval society placed enormous importance on social hierarchy, the body could quietly reveal class. A clean, well-kept hand might suggest leisure. A rough hand might suggest work. Neither was necessarily morally better, but society noticed the difference. The beauty of a healthy body. One thing that medieval people shared with many societies throughout history was admiration for health. A person who looked strong and healthy could be attractive. A healthy appearance suggested that the body was functioning properly. But what counted as the ideal body could vary. Medieval paintings sometimes depict people with fuller bodies than modern fashion magazines might prefer. In other contexts, slenderness could be admired. Again, there was no single medieval body standard. The Middle Ages lasted for centuries. During that time, tastes changed. Different regions had different ideals, and artistic symbolism could make bodies appear very different from real people. The safest conclusion is that medieval beauty was diverse, but health and youth remained powerful themes. Food and beauty. Food also influenced appearance. This may seem obvious now, but in medieval Europe, access to food could vary dramatically. A wealthy household could have more variety. A poor family might depend on basic grains, vegetables, and whatever local foods were available. A person's body therefore reflected their environment. Someone who regularly had access to rich food could appear different from someone who lived with food insecurity. This created an unusual connection between wealth and appearance. In some historical contexts, a little extra body fat could signal that someone had enough food. It could suggest security. In other contexts, a slimmer body might be admired. Beauty was therefore partly connected to what society feared and what society desired. When food was scarce, abundance could look beautiful. When food became plentiful, different ideals could develop. Beauty often reflects the problems of a society. Teeth and the price of sweetness. Now return to the teeth. Sugar was a luxury for much of medieval Europe. It was not always absent, but it was expensive and less widely available than today. Sweet foods could therefore be associated with wealth. Imagine tasting something sweet in a medieval noble household. It would not necessarily be an ordinary, everyday experience. Sugar could be used in special preparations. Honey was another important sweetener. And people certainly enjoyed sweet flavors. But dentistry was primitive compared with modern standards. A painful tooth could become a serious problem. There were people who practiced forms of dental care. But there was nothing like modern restorative dentistry. No comfortable fillings. No routine professional cleaning. No modern anesthesia. And no simple solution for every dental problem. If a tooth became badly damaged, extraction might be the answer. This meant that a person's smile could be affected by their health and circumstances. Yet people still cared about their teeth. They still wanted to look presentable. Human vanity did not disappear simply because dentistry was difficult. The medieval smile. Interestingly, medieval art does not often show people smiling broadly in the way modern photographs do. This does not mean medieval people never smiled. Of course they did. They laughed. They joked. They enjoyed celebrations. They loved their children. They teased friends. They experienced joy. But artistic conventions were different. A serious face could communicate dignity. A calm expression could suggest refinement. Religious art often avoided casual expressions. So when we look at medieval paintings, we should not assume that everyone was miserable. The faces are telling us something about artistic style. They are not necessarily recording people's everyday emotions. Beauty and religion. Religion was deeply woven into medieval European life. This naturally influenced ideas about the body and appearance. Beauty could be viewed positively, but vanity could also be criticized. There was an important difference between looking respectable and becoming obsessed with appearance. A person could dress neatly, maintain good hygiene, wear attractive clothing, and still be expected to avoid excessive pride. This created a tension. People wanted to look beautiful, but they were also reminded that earthly beauty was temporary. Youth would fade. Hair would turn gray. Skin would wrinkle. Bodies would age. And eventually everyone would die. This idea appears repeatedly in medieval religious thought. Beauty was temporary. The soul was more important. At least, that was the lesson religious teachers often wanted people to remember. Beauty and morality. Because appearance could be associated with character, beauty sometimes became morally complicated. A beautiful person might be admired, but someone who cared too much about beauty could be accused of vanity. This was not necessarily a contradiction. The ideal was often moderation. Look respectable. Take care of yourself, but do not become obsessed. Of course, ordinary people did not always follow philosophical ideals. Human beings have always enjoyed admiration, and medieval people were no different. A person could understand that beauty was temporary and still spend an hour arranging their hair. That is a very human contradiction. The medieval woman preparing for a feast. Imagine a wealthy medieval woman preparing for a feast. The preparation might begin long before she enters the hall. Her hair needs attention. Her clothing must be chosen. Her head covering needs to be arranged. Jewelry might be selected. Her shoes must match the occasion. Perhaps a fragrance is applied. Perhaps her hands and face are cleaned carefully. And then comes the final inspection. She looks at herself. Not in a modern mirror, but enough to understand the overall impression. Does the clothing sit correctly? Is the head covering positioned properly? Does the hairstyle look neat? Does everything suggest the social position she wants others to recognize? The preparation is not simply vanity. It is social strategy. She is entering a room full of people who understand status. Everyone will notice. The medieval man preparing for a gathering. A man preparing for the same event faces his own expectations. His clothing needs to look appropriate. His hair and beard may need attention. His shoes should be presentable. If he is wealthy, his fabric may communicate his status. If he is a warrior, his appearance may emphasize strength. If he is a nobleman, elegance and confidence matter. He must also behave correctly, because beauty is not only physical. Manners matter. Posture matters. Speech matters. A person who looks wealthy but behaves badly may quickly lose respect. Medieval society cared deeply about reputation, and reputation could be one of the most valuable things a person possessed. Beauty as a performance. Perhaps the best way to understand medieval beauty is to think of it as performance. People were performing their social identity. A noblewoman dressed like a noblewoman. A merchant dressed like a merchant. A monk dressed according to religious expectations. A laborer wore practical clothing. Each person was showing the world where they belonged. And beauty existed inside this system. The ideal appearance was not simply, do I look attractive? It was also, do I look like the person I am supposed to be? That is a very important difference. The slow world of medieval fashion. Fashion moved more slowly than it does today. There were no global social media trends spreading within minutes. A style could take time to travel. A fashion might begin among elites. Then other wealthy people could imitate it. Eventually, versions might appear among broader groups. But distance mattered. A style popular in one region might not immediately become popular elsewhere. And because clothing was expensive, people did not simply throw away last year's wardrobe. Garments could be altered, repaired, reused, passed down, or transformed into something else. Fashion was therefore slower and more practical, but people still cared about it. Why beauty standards changed. So, why did medieval beauty ideals change? Because societies change. Wealth changes. Trade changes. Religion changes. Politics changes. Technology changes. And contact with other cultures changes. When new materials became available, fashion could change. When trade routes expanded, new dyes and perfumes could become accessible. When powerful people adopted a style, others might imitate them. Beauty is therefore connected to history. You cannot understand medieval beauty without understanding medieval society. A world without advertisements. Think about modern beauty for a moment. Everywhere you look, there are messages telling you how to appear. Advertisements, billboards, television, social media, influencers, celebrities, magazines, beauty companies. The medieval world had nothing comparable to this scale, but people still received beauty messages. They came from paintings, songs, poems, religious teachings, courtly literature, family traditions, and, most importantly, other people. A beautiful person was praised. Their appearance could become a subject of poetry. Their clothing could be admired. Their hairstyle could be copied. The system was smaller, but the basic human mechanism was similar. People looked at one another. They noticed what received admiration, and they adjusted themselves accordingly. The end of another medieval evening. Now the feast is over. The guests have gone. The hall is quieter. The candles are burning lower. The beautiful clothing that took so long to prepare is being removed. Jewelry is placed away. The head covering is loosened. Hair is allowed to rest. The room becomes ordinary again. And beneath all the expensive fabric and careful grooming is simply a human being. Someone who is tired. Someone who wants to sleep. Someone who will wake up tomorrow and return to ordinary life. The beauty standards disappear for a few hours. No one needs to look impressive while sleeping. No one needs to prove their social position. The candle continues to shrink. The flame becomes smaller. Outside, the medieval street is silent. And slowly, the night takes everything back. The colors disappear first, then the details, then the shapes, until there is only darkness. And somewhere inside that darkness, hundreds of years ago, a medieval person fell asleep. Perhaps they dreamed. Perhaps they worried about tomorrow. Perhaps they thought about someone they loved. Perhaps they wondered what people thought of them. We will never know. But we do know that beneath the strange fashions and unfamiliar customs, they were human, just like us. And perhaps that is enough for tonight. The Middle Ages can wait. The next chapter of our journey will take us deeper into the strange world of medieval cosmetics, hair care, clothing, perfume, and the quiet rituals people use to make themselves beautiful. For now, let the candle go out. Let the old streets become still. And let the past become quiet. Medieval beauty standards were stranger than you think. Boring history for sleep. Part 3. The night has become deeper now. The streets are quiet. The last sounds of the evening have faded into the distance. Inside a medieval house, a small flame continues to burn. And somewhere nearby, a woman is preparing the things she will need for tomorrow. A comb, a piece of cloth, perhaps a small container of oil, perhaps some herbs. Nothing looks particularly impressive. There are no glass bottles lined up on a bathroom shelf. No bright labels. No carefully designed packaging. And yet, these simple objects belong to something surprisingly familiar. A beauty routine. Because although medieval people lived in a world without modern cosmetics, they still had routines for taking care of their appearance. They combed their hair. They cleaned their skin. They cared about smell. They adjusted their clothing. They used oils and herbs. And when they could afford it, they experimented with preparations intended to make them look more attractive. Tonight, we will slow down even further and explore those quiet routines. The medieval morning. Imagine waking up in a medieval household. There is no alarm clock, no electric light, no sudden sound from a smartphone. Instead, the morning arrives gradually. Perhaps there is sunlight entering through a small opening. Perhaps someone else in the household is already awake. The fire may need attention. Water may need to be brought inside. Animals may need to be fed. The day begins with work. And yet, before a person enters the world outside, there are small things to do. The face may be washed. The hands cleaned. Hair combed. Clothing adjusted. For someone wealthy, this process could be more elaborate. For someone poor, it might be very simple. But appearance still mattered. Even people who could not afford expensive cosmetics could still try to look neat. And neatness was important. The comb. One of the most useful objects in a medieval person's beauty routine was something incredibly simple. A comb. Combs could be made from different materials. Some were made from wood. Others could be made from bone or horn. Wealthier people could possess more finely decorated examples. But the basic purpose remained the same. Untangle the hair. Remove dirt. Arrange it. Prepare it for styling. Hair could easily become tangled, especially when it was long. And medieval women often wore their hair long. So combing was not a tiny detail. It could take time. The sound of a comb moving slowly through hair might have been a familiar sound in medieval households. A quiet sound, repeated every morning, and perhaps again before bed. Long hair and patience. Long hair looks beautiful in paintings, but long hair also requires work. It needs to be brushed. It needs to be arranged. It can become tangled. It can collect dirt. It can become difficult to manage. Today, someone with long hair has access to shampoos, conditioners, hair dryers, brushes, oils, sprays, and countless other products. A medieval woman had far fewer options. She had her hands, a comb, water, possibly oils, and whatever traditional preparations were available. This meant that maintaining beautiful hair could be an ongoing task, and sometimes another person might help. A wealthy woman could have a servant or attendant who helped arrange her hair. This was another quiet example of wealth. The more complicated the hairstyle, the more useful an extra pair of hands became. Hair as a sign of respectability. Hair could communicate more than beauty. It could communicate social status. Religious expectations could influence whether hair was visible. Marital status could influence head coverings. And certain hairstyles could become fashionable among particular groups. So hair was part of social language. A woman did not simply choose any hairstyle she liked. She lived inside a culture with expectations. A hairstyle could be attractive but inappropriate for a particular occasion. A head covering could be necessary in certain settings. And someone who ignored these expectations might attract unwanted attention. Beauty was therefore connected to rules. The veil. The veil is one of the most recognizable images associated with medieval women. But the meaning of a veil was not always simple. It could indicate modesty. It could reflect religious customs. It could signal marital status. It could also simply be fashionable. Different regions and centuries had different practices. And not every medieval woman covered her hair in exactly the same way. Still, the basic idea is fascinating. A piece of fabric could change how someone was perceived. The same woman could appear very different with her hair uncovered, loosely covered, or carefully arranged beneath a formal headpiece. Clothing could change identity. The beauty of fabric. Now, imagine touching a medieval fabric. It might be rough wool, or smooth linen, or something much finer. The difference would be immediately noticeable. Medieval people lived in a world where fabric quality mattered. Clothing could be one of the clearest signs of wealth. A poor person might own only a few garments. They had to be durable. They needed to survive work. A wealthy person could own more clothing. They could afford decorative details, better fabric, more elaborate designs, and expensive dyes. The clothing itself could become part of the person's beauty. Jewelry and small details. Jewelry was another way to communicate wealth. A small ring, a necklace, a brooch, a decorative clasp, an ornament attached to clothing. These objects could be valuable, but they could also have sentimental meaning. A piece of jewelry might be inherited, given as a gift, connected to marriage, or associated with a particular family. So beauty was sometimes tied to memory. A woman might wear an object not only because it looked beautiful, but because it reminded her of someone. The medieval world was full of objects that had multiple meanings. The medieval beauty of the hands. Hands were often visible. And because hands could reveal work, they could also reveal social status. Imagine the hand of a person who spends every day working with soil. The skin may be rough. The nails may be difficult to keep perfectly clean. The fingers may have small injuries. Now imagine the hand of a wealthy woman. Perhaps she does not perform heavy manual labor. Her hands may be softer. She might decorate them with rings. The contrast would be visible. In this way, the body could tell the story of a person's daily life. A medieval person did not need to ask, "What class are you?" They could often see clues. Nails and personal grooming. People have cared about their nails for a very long time. Medieval grooming practices were naturally much simpler than today's. There were no professional manicure salons, no gel polish, no acrylic extensions, but people could still trim and clean their nails. Personal grooming was part of appearing respectable. This might seem like a tiny detail, but tiny details are often what make a person look neat. A clean face, combed hair, clean hands, neat clothing, a pleasant smell. None of these things alone is extraordinary. Together, they create an impression. The medieval face wash. Imagine preparing to wash your face. There is no sink, no warm water coming from a pipe, no liquid facial cleanser. Instead, water must be brought into the room. Perhaps it is cool. Perhaps it has been warmed slightly. The person washes their face and hands. The process is simple, but even simple washing can make someone feel refreshed. This may be one of the reasons medieval people valued water so much. Clean water was useful for many parts of life, but access could vary greatly. A person living near a reliable water source had an advantage. A person living in a crowded city with poor water conditions faced greater difficulties. Medieval skincare. Skincare existed, although the word itself would not have been used in the modern sense. People were concerned about the appearance and condition of their skin. They could use oils, herbs, ointments, powders, and other preparations. Some recipes were passed through households. Others appeared in written collections. The ingredients depended on geography and wealth. A person with access to imported materials had more choices than someone living in a poor rural household. And some substances were used because they smelled pleasant. Others were used because they were believed to soften the skin. Others were intended to improve complexion. The important thing is not whether every recipe worked. It is that people were experimenting. They were observing their bodies. They were trying things. They were sharing knowledge. Beauty knowledge existed long before modern science. The danger of beauty recipes. Some medieval beauty recipes sound harmless. Others sound strange. And some could be genuinely dangerous. This happened because medieval people lacked the chemical and medical knowledge we have today. If a substance seemed to produce a visible change, people might assume it was useful. If a recipe had been used for generations, that tradition could give it authority. But tradition is not the same as safety. A preparation could irritate skin, cause illness, or create other problems. And because there was no modern system for testing cosmetics, harmful practices could continue. This is one reason we should be careful when romanticizing historical beauty routines. They were fascinating, but they were not necessarily safe. The medieval perfume box. Now imagine opening a small container of fragrant material. Perhaps there are dried flowers inside. Perhaps herbs. Perhaps scented oil. The smell rises immediately. For a medieval person, fragrance could be powerful. The streets smelled different. Buildings smelled different. Clothing smelled different. People smelled different. So perfume was not simply a luxury. It could transform the experience of being around someone. A pleasant fragrance could suggest cleanliness. It could create an atmosphere of elegance. And it could make a wealthy person memorable. The cost of fragrance. The best fragrances could be expensive. Some ingredients had to travel long distances. Trade routes connected Europe with other parts of the world. Spices and aromatic materials could cross enormous distances before reaching a wealthy household. Imagine the journey. A plant grows far away. Someone collects it. It is processed, packed, transported, sold, and eventually reaches a person living hundreds or thousands of miles away. That tiny amount of fragrance carries the history of trade with it. Beauty could therefore depend on the movement of goods across continents. The medieval spice cabinet. A wealthy medieval household might possess spices that ordinary people rarely tasted. Pepper, cinnamon, cloves, ginger, and other valuable ingredients could be expensive. Some of these materials were useful not only for cooking but also for scent and medicine. This shows how blurry the boundaries between beauty, medicine, food, and fragrance could be. One substance might be used in several different ways. People did not divide life into the same neat categories we do today. A fragrant plant could be food, medicine, decoration, or part of a beauty preparation. Beauty and medicine. This connection is especially important. Medieval people often understood the body through medical theories that are very different from modern medicine. They believed health depended on internal balance. Certain foods could be considered hot or cold. Some substances were believed to affect bodily fluids. And beauty could sometimes be interpreted as a sign of internal health. If someone's skin looked healthy, perhaps they were considered healthy. If someone's face looked pale, the interpretation could depend on context. Paleness might indicate wealth, or illness, or emotional distress. The same physical feature could have completely different meanings. The beautiful blush, a little color in the face, could sometimes be associated with health and youth. This creates an interesting contrast. Pale skin could be admired, but a completely lifeless appearance was not necessarily the goal. A healthy-looking complexion could be considered attractive, so beauty could involve balance. Pale, but not sickly. Youthful, but not childish. Elegant, but not excessive. The exact balance changed with fashion, but the idea remained. People wanted their appearance to communicate health. The eyes. Eyes were another important part of beauty. Medieval poetry frequently used the eyes as symbols. Bright eyes could suggest beauty. Clear eyes could suggest health. A gentle gaze could suggest kindness. And the eyes could be central to romantic descriptions. In a world without photographs, poets helped create beauty through words. A woman's eyes could be compared to jewels, her hair to gold, her skin to flowers, her lips to precious colors. These comparisons were not realistic descriptions. They were literary tools. But they tell us what kinds of features writers believed audiences would understand as beautiful. The medieval ideal of a small mouth. In some medieval artistic traditions, women's mouths were depicted as small and delicate. A tiny mouth could contribute to the idealized appearance of a graceful face. Again, this was not necessarily a universal rule. It was part of a visual tradition. Artists repeatedly produced similar faces. Over time, the repetition created an image of ideal beauty. This is how cultural beauty standards can become powerful. People see the same pattern again and again. Eventually, it feels natural. The face that never ages. Medieval art often gave beautiful people remarkably youthful faces. A saint might appear young. A noble woman might appear flawless. A religious figure could have smooth skin despite being represented as someone who had lived for many years. This was not because medieval artists misunderstood aging. It was because art had different purposes. The goal was often symbolic. Youth represented purity. Smooth skin represented perfection. Beauty represented goodness. Art was not always trying to document reality. The reality behind the paintings. Real medieval people were much more ordinary. They had wrinkles, scars, sun damage, dental problems, injuries, illness, birthmarks, and all the small imperfections that human beings have always had. They also had bad hair days. They probably woke up with tangled hair. They probably spilled food on clothing. They probably had moments when they looked into a reflection and thought, "I do not look very good today." That is another way medieval people become familiar. Their world was strange. Their technology was different. Their beliefs were different. But their everyday insecurities were probably not entirely unfamiliar. Beauty before a wedding. Now imagine a medieval wedding. This is where appearance becomes especially important. A wedding is not an ordinary day. Families gather. Guests arrive. Clothing becomes more important. The bride may wear her finest available garments. Her hair is carefully arranged. Her head covering is chosen with care. Jewelry may be included. The entire household is involved. And the bride is not simply dressing for herself. She is representing her family. Marriage could connect families, property, status, and political relationships. So beauty becomes part of a much larger social event. The bride must look appropriate. She must look respectable. She must look prosperous. She must look like someone worthy of entering a new household. The clothing is therefore part of the message. The wedding dress was not always white. One modern assumption is that brides have always worn white. They have not. The modern white wedding dress became popular much later. Medieval brides could wear different colors depending on their circumstances and local customs. Rich fabrics and bright colors could be desirable. The most important thing was often the quality and beauty of the clothing. A wealthy bride might wear something impressive because she could afford it. A poorer bride might wear her best available clothing. The idea of a single universal bridal color did not dominate medieval Europe. The medieval wedding hair. Hair preparation for an important event could take considerable time. Braids could be arranged. Hair could be pinned. Head coverings could be carefully positioned. Decorative elements could be added. The final appearance could be very different from the ordinary daily hairstyle. This reminds us that medieval beauty was often situational. You did not necessarily dress the same way for working in the fields as you did for attending a wedding. You did not necessarily look the same at home as you did at court. Beauty changed with context. Beauty at court. At a royal or aristocratic court, appearance could become even more important. People were constantly watching one another. Who had arrived? Who was standing near the ruler? Who was wearing expensive clothing? Who had received a gift? Who was being ignored? Who appeared confident? Court life was a world of subtle signals. Clothing and appearance could communicate alliances, wealth, family connections, ambition, and status. A person who looked out of place could be noticed immediately. So beauty was partly political. The medieval beauty competition. There were no modern beauty contests, no stage, no judges holding scorecards, no official crown for the most beautiful woman in the kingdom. But social comparisons still existed. People compared clothing, hair, faces, jewelry, manners, and family status. Someone could become admired because they were exceptionally beautiful. A poet could write about them. A nobleman could praise them. Their appearance could become part of their reputation. In a smaller world, personal reputation could travel surprisingly far. When beauty became dangerous, beauty could also attract unwanted attention. A person who stood out could become the subject of gossip. Someone's clothing could provoke jealousy. A woman's appearance could become part of rumors about her character. This was especially important in societies where reputation mattered deeply. Being admired could be valuable, but being talked about too much could become dangerous. The line between beauty and social judgment was thin. The burden of looking perfect. Imagine having to look respectable every time you enter an important room. No quick photograph. No second chance. No editing. The impression you create exists in the minds of the people around you. If your clothing is damaged, they see it. If your hair is badly arranged, they see it. If your shoes are worn, they see it. If your face looks tired, they see it. There is something strangely intimate about that. Medieval people lived without the ability to hide behind digital images. Their appearance existed in real time. And once someone formed an impression of them, that impression could remain. Beauty and aging. Of course, no beauty routine could stop time. A person who was young eventually became older. Hair changed. Skin changed. The body changed. And medieval people understood this very well. Aging was unavoidable. There were preparations intended to preserve youth. There were traditional remedies. There were cosmetic tricks. But no one could escape aging. This gave beauty a slightly melancholy quality. A beautiful face was temporary. A youthful body was temporary. Even the most expensive clothing would eventually wear out. The most elaborate hairstyle would eventually be undone. The candle would eventually go out. Everything passed. The quiet philosophy of beauty. Perhaps this is why medieval writers so often connected beauty with impermanence. A flower is beautiful because it blooms, but it eventually fades. Youth is beautiful because it is temporary. Beauty is precious partly because it does not last. For medieval religious thinkers, this could become a lesson. Do not place all your value in appearance. The body changes. The soul matters more. The world changes. Only certain things endure. Whether or not ordinary people followed this advice, the idea was powerful, and perhaps it still is. Before sleep, the beauty routine is finished now. The hair has been combed. The clothing has been folded. The jewelry has been put away. The fragrance has faded into the air. The room is dark. Outside, the medieval town is sleeping. Tomorrow, the same ordinary work will begin again. Water will be carried. Bread will be prepared. Animals will be fed. Markets will open. People will meet. And somewhere, someone will once again worry about looking presentable. But tonight, none of that matters. The face does not need to be perfect. The hair does not need to be perfect. The clothing does not need to be impressive. The medieval world has gone quiet, and perhaps for a few hours, beauty itself can rest. The candle becomes smaller. The flame becomes softer, and the old room slowly disappears into darkness. The next part of our journey will take us even deeper into the world of medieval beauty. We will explore courtly romance, idealized women in medieval literature, the beauty of noble women, the relationship between wealth and physical appearance, and the strange ways people tried to imitate the beauty of royalty. But for now, there is nothing else to do. Just rest, and let the medieval night continue. Medieval beauty standards were stranger than you think. Boring history for sleep. Part 4. The night is deeper now. The medieval town has become almost completely silent. The workshops are closed. The marketplace is empty. The footsteps that filled the streets during the day have disappeared. Only an occasional sound travels through the darkness. Perhaps a distant dog. Perhaps the wind moving between wooden buildings. Perhaps the quiet creaking of a door. Inside one of the houses, a candle continues to burn. And while most people are sleeping, we can continue our journey into the medieval idea of beauty. So far, we have looked at skin, hair, clothing, cleanliness, fragrance, and social status. Now we can move into something even more interesting. The beauty of the noblewoman. The beauty of the court. and the strange relationship between physical appearance and power. Beauty at the noble court. Imagine arriving at a medieval royal court. The first thing you would notice would probably not be the architecture. It would be the people. There are nobles everywhere. Men and women wearing clothing that looks completely different from the clothes of ordinary workers. Rich fabrics, decorative sleeves,
jewelry, belts,
head coverings, shoes that were never designed for working in muddy fields. The court is a place where appearance matters. Everyone is watching everyone else. A person entering the room is immediately judged. What are they wearing? How expensive does it look? How carefully is it made? Who are they standing beside? Who speaks to them? Who ignores them? These small details could communicate status. And beauty existed inside this world of observation. The noblewoman. A noblewoman did not necessarily have an easy life. From the outside, her world could appear comfortable. She might have fine clothing,
servants,
better food, a warm room, beautiful jewelry. But she could also have responsibilities that were enormous. Marriage could be arranged for political reasons. Her family could expect her to behave in a certain way. Her appearance could reflect on her relatives. Her clothing could communicate the wealth of her household. Her behavior could affect the reputation of her family. So looking beautiful was sometimes part of a much larger responsibility. She was not simply dressing herself. She was representing a family, the face of nobility. The face of a noblewoman could become part of the image of her family. Imagine a portrait or manuscript illustration showing an aristocratic woman. She appears calm. Her skin is smooth. Her hair is carefully arranged. Her clothing is elaborate. Her posture is graceful. The image communicates something immediately. This woman belongs to a higher social world. Even if the artist did not paint every detail realistically, the overall impression was important. Beauty and nobility could become intertwined. Courtly love. Medieval literature also helped shape ideas about beauty. One important tradition was courtly love. Poets and writers described idealized women. These women were often presented as extraordinarily beautiful. Their hair could be compared to gold, their skin to flowers or precious materials. Their eyes could be described as bright and captivating. Their voices could be portrayed as gentle. Their movements could be graceful. But these descriptions were not simply realistic observations. They were part of a literary game. The woman became an ideal. Sometimes she was placed almost beyond reach. The man admired her. He suffered because of her beauty. He wrote poetry. He demonstrated loyalty. And her beauty became the reason for his devotion. The woman who is too beautiful. Medieval stories sometimes imagine beauty as something almost dangerous. A woman could be so beautiful that men became obsessed with her. Her appearance could cause jealousy. It could create conflict. It could lead people into foolish decisions. This is a familiar storytelling pattern. Beauty becomes powerful. The beautiful person does not need a sword. They do not need an army. Their appearance itself changes the behavior of other people. Of course, real medieval women were ordinary human beings. But literature enjoyed exaggeration. The more beautiful the woman, the more powerful the story. The golden hair of romance. Golden hair appears repeatedly in romantic literature. The reason is partly symbolic. Gold was valuable. It was bright. It reflected light.
And it suggested rarity.
So, describing someone's hair as golden was a way of saying that the person was precious. The comparison did not necessarily mean that every beautiful woman had blonde hair. It meant that the writer wanted the reader to imagine something extraordinary. The same thing happens today when someone compares eyes to jewels or skin to silk. Beauty language is rarely literal. The perfect skin of literature. The same was true of skin. A beautiful woman in medieval literature might have impossibly smooth skin. No wrinkles, no scars, no blemishes, no signs of ordinary life. Again, this was an ideal. Real skin does not behave like that. Real people work. They get sunburned. They become tired. They age. They become sick. But poetry does not have to follow reality. Poetry can create perfection. And medieval writers used that freedom. Beauty and purity. In religious and literary traditions, beauty could sometimes be connected with purity. A beautiful face could be imagined as clean, innocent, and morally good. Medieval beauty standards were stranger than you think. Boring history for sleep. Part 4. The night is deeper now. The medieval town has become almost completely silent. The workshops are closed. The marketplace is empty. The footsteps that filled the streets during the day have disappeared. Only an occasional sound travels through the darkness. Perhaps a distant dog. Perhaps the wind moving between wooden buildings. Perhaps the quiet creaking of a door. Inside one of the houses, a candle continues to burn. And while most people are sleeping, we can continue our journey into the medieval idea of beauty. So far, we have looked at skin, hair, clothing, cleanliness, fragrance, and social status. Now we can move into something even more interesting. The beauty of the noblewoman. The beauty of the court. And the strange relationship between physical appearance and power. Beauty at the noble court. Imagine arriving at a medieval royal court. The first thing you would notice would probably not be the architecture. It would be the people. There are nobles everywhere. Men and women wearing clothing that looks completely different from the clothes of ordinary workers. Rich fabrics. Decorative sleeves. Jewelry.
Belts.
Head coverings. Shoes that were never designed for working in muddy fields. The court is a place where appearance matters. Everyone is watching everyone else. A person entering the room is immediately judged. What are they wearing? How expensive does it look? How carefully is it made?
Who are they standing beside? Who speaks to them? Who ignores them?
These small details could communicate status. And beauty existed inside this world of observation. The noblewoman. A noblewoman did not necessarily have an easy life. From the outside, her world could appear comfortable. She might have fine clothing, servants, better food, a warm room, beautiful jewelry. But she could also have responsibilities that were enormous. Marriage could be arranged for political reasons. Her family could expect her to behave in a certain way. Her appearance could reflect on her relatives. Her clothing could communicate the wealth of her household. Her behavior could affect the reputation of her family. So looking beautiful was sometimes part of a much larger responsibility. She was not simply dressing herself. She was representing a family. The face of nobility. The face of a noblewoman could become part of the image of her family. Imagine a portrait or manuscript illustration showing an aristocratic woman. She appears calm. Her skin is smooth. Her hair is carefully arranged. Her clothing is elaborate. Her posture is graceful. The image communicates something immediately. This woman belongs to a higher social world. Even if the artist did not paint every detail realistically, the overall impression was important. Beauty and nobility could become intertwined. Courtly love. Medieval literature also helped shape ideas about beauty. One important tradition was courtly love. Poets and writers described idealized women. These women were often presented as extraordinarily beautiful. Their hair could be compared to gold, their skin to flowers or precious materials. Their eyes could be described as bright and captivating. Their voices could be portrayed as gentle. Their movements could be graceful. But these descriptions were not simply realistic observations. They were part of a literary game. The woman became an ideal. Sometimes she was placed almost beyond reach. The man admired her. He suffered because of her beauty. He wrote poetry. He demonstrated loyalty. And her beauty became the reason for his devotion. The woman who is too beautiful. Medieval stories sometimes imagine beauty as something almost dangerous. A woman could be so beautiful that men became obsessed with her. Her appearance could cause jealousy. It could create conflict. It could lead people into foolish decisions. This is a familiar storytelling pattern. Beauty becomes powerful. The beautiful person does not need a sword. They do not need an army. Their appearance itself changes the behavior of other people. Of course, real medieval women were ordinary human beings. But literature enjoyed exaggeration. The more beautiful the woman, the more powerful the story. The golden hair of romance. Golden hair appears repeatedly in romantic literature. The reason is partly symbolic. Gold was valuable. It was bright. It reflected light. And it suggested rarity. So describing someone's hair as golden was a way of saying that the person was precious. The comparison did not necessarily mean that every beautiful woman had blonde hair. It meant that the writer wanted the reader to imagine something extraordinary. The same thing happens today when someone compares eyes to jewels or skin to silk. Beauty language is rarely literal. The perfect skin of literature. The same was true of skin. A beautiful woman in medieval literature might have impossibly smooth skin. No wrinkles. No scars. No blemishes. No signs of ordinary life. Again, this was an ideal. Real skin does not behave like that. Real people work. They get sunburned. They become tired. They age. They become sick. But poetry does not have to follow reality. Poetry can create perfection. And medieval writers used that freedom, beauty and purity. In religious and literary traditions, beauty could sometimes be connected with purity. A beautiful face could be imagined as clean, innocent, and morally good. But this was complicated, because beauty could also be associated with temptation. A beautiful person could attract attention, and too much attention could be dangerous. So beauty could be both admired and feared. It could represent goodness, or temptation, or pride, or social status. The meaning depended on the story. The medieval woman and modesty. One of the strongest expectations placed on women in many medieval societies was modesty. This did not mean that women were expected to look unattractive. Quite the opposite. A woman could be beautifully dressed. Her clothing could be expensive. Her hair could be carefully arranged. But she was also expected to behave appropriately. The ideal woman was often imagined as graceful rather than attention-seeking, beautiful rather than boastful, well-dressed rather than excessively decorated. Again, these ideals were not always followed. People are rarely as obedient as the rules written about them. But the expectations existed. The problem of excess. Medieval moralists sometimes criticized excessive attention to appearance. Too much jewelry. Too much makeup. Too much expensive clothing. Too much time spent on the body. The concern was not always that beauty itself was bad. The concern was excess. If a person spent all their attention on appearance, they might be accused of vanity. This idea is not unique to medieval Europe. Many societies have warned people not to become too obsessed with beauty, yet people continue to care because admiration feels good, and looking good can influence how others treat you. The richer the fabric, the greater the impression. Now imagine two people standing beside each other. One wears a simple wool garment. The other wears a beautifully dyed fabric with detailed decoration. Before either person speaks, you already know something about them. The expensive garment required resources. The wearer could afford it. Perhaps their family had money. Perhaps they belonged to a powerful household. The clothing therefore creates an immediate impression. This is why medieval sumptuary rules could become important. In some places and periods, authorities attempted to control what people were allowed to wear. The reason was simple. If everyone dressed like nobles, how would people visually recognize social hierarchy? Clothing had to preserve differences. Rules about clothing. Medieval authorities sometimes created regulations concerning luxury. The exact rules varied. Some focused on expensive fabrics. Some concerned fur. Some concerned jewelry. Some addressed particular colors or styles. These rules were not always perfectly enforced. People found ways around restrictions, but their existence reveals something important. Appearance was politically significant. A person's clothing could challenge social boundaries. If a wealthy merchant dressed too much like a noble, it might create discomfort. If someone of lower status displayed too much luxury, authorities could see it as a threat to hierarchy. Fashion was therefore not always harmless. Sometimes it was political. Beauty and power. This brings us back to the central idea. Beauty can communicate power. A person who has time to maintain their appearance has leisure. A person who can afford expensive fabrics has wealth. A person who can hire servants has resources. A person who can purchase imported perfume has access to trade. A person who can wear elaborate jewelry has security. So beauty can become a visible summary of privilege. The beautiful medieval noblewoman is therefore not simply beautiful. Her appearance tells you about the systems supporting her. Servants and the beauty routine. Imagine a wealthy woman's bedroom. There may be several people helping her. One person assists with clothing. Another helps with hair. Someone else prepares water. Someone may help maintain fabrics and jewelry. A complicated beauty routine becomes possible because other people are working behind the scenes. This is an important difference between medieval classes. A poor woman might have to perform all her own grooming. A wealthy woman could delegate much of it. Beauty could therefore become a team effort. The medieval hairdresser. There were people who specialized in grooming and hair-related work. The exact organization varied across places. But the basic idea is familiar. If you have complicated hair, someone needs to know how to arrange it. Braids can be complex. Head coverings can require careful positioning. Decorative hairstyles may need pins or other methods to hold them in place. For wealthy women, grooming could therefore become a specialized skill. A skilled attendant could make a significant difference. Hairstyles as fashion. Hair fashions changed. A hairstyle that looked elegant in one decade could become old-fashioned later. This is one of the few things that makes medieval beauty feel surprisingly modern.
People cared about trends.
They noticed what other fashionable people were doing. They copied styles.
They modified them.
And eventually they moved on. The difference was speed. Fashion changed more slowly because communication was slower. There was no internet, no global celebrity culture, but change still happened. The influence of royalty. When a powerful queen adopted a particular style, others could imitate it. Royal clothing was visible.
People talked about it.
Artists represented it. Visitors carried descriptions back to their homes. A royal hairstyle could therefore influence fashion beyond the palace. The same thing happened with colors and fabrics. What the elite wore could become aspirational. People wanted to look like the powerful. This is another ancient feature of human behavior. We often imitate people we admire. Beauty and marriage. Marriage was another reason appearance mattered. For wealthy families, marriage could involve property, alliances, inheritance, and politics. Physical attractiveness was only one factor. Family background mattered enormously. Money mattered. Reputation mattered. Religion mattered. But beauty could still influence attraction. A young woman might be praised for her appearance. A man might be described as handsome. And poets could turn beauty into romantic language. The human desire for attraction existed alongside practical concerns. The medieval bride. Imagine the bride again. She has spent hours preparing. Her clothing is the finest available. Her hair has been arranged. Her head covering is carefully positioned. Jewelry may have been selected. Her family watches. Guests watch. The groom watches. And for a brief moment, her appearance becomes part of a public event. Everyone is seeing her. But once the celebration ends, the clothing will be removed. The jewelry will be stored. The hair will be undone. And the woman will return to ordinary life. Beauty is always temporary. The beauty of the ordinary woman. It is important not to focus only on queens and noble women. Most medieval women were not wealthy. Most did not live in castles. Most did not have servants. Most had practical concerns.
Food, work,
Children, clothing, fuel, weather, illness, family, and survival. Their beauty routines were likely much simpler. A comb, clean clothing when possible, basic washing, perhaps herbs or oils, and the desire to look respectable. This ordinary beauty is harder to see in historical records. The rich left behind more objects, more paintings, more written descriptions, more expensive clothing. Poor people's beauty routines were often invisible, but they existed. Beauty in the village. Imagine a small medieval village. There is no grand court, no marble palace, no royal mirror. There are fields, animals, wooden homes, a church, a small marketplace. People know one another. In such a place, reputation is extremely important. A person's appearance is familiar. People know who is careful with clothing, who always looks neat, who has beautiful hair, who dresses unusually well, who seems wealthy, who has recently married. The village itself becomes a social network. No internet is necessary. Everyone already knows everyone. Beauty and reputation. This makes appearance especially interesting. If people see you every day, small changes become noticeable. A new dress, a new hairstyle, a piece of jewelry, a different head covering. Perhaps someone has received a gift. Perhaps someone has become wealthier. Perhaps someone is preparing for marriage. Appearance can therefore become news. And medieval gossip was probably just as active as modern gossip. People talked. They speculated. They admired. They criticized. Human beings have always been interested in other people's lives. Beauty and jealousy. Where there is admiration, there can also be jealousy. A beautiful dress could attract attention. A successful marriage could attract envy. A wealthy household could become the subject of resentment. Beauty can therefore have social consequences. A person who stands out is not always treated kindly. The medieval world was deeply communal. People lived close together. Privacy was limited. Your neighbors could know a great deal about you. So being admired could be both flattering and uncomfortable. The beauty of humility. Because excessive pride was criticized, humility could itself become attractive. A beautiful person who behaved modestly might be praised more highly than someone who constantly showed off. This created an ideal combination. Beautiful, well-dressed, graceful, but humble. Of course, humans rarely perfectly match ideals. A noble woman might secretly enjoy admiration. A handsome man might know exactly how attractive he was. And someone who preached humility might still appreciate fine clothing. The medieval world was full of contradictions, beauty and the passage of time. Eventually, every beautiful young person became older. This was unavoidable, and medieval people understood it. A woman praised for her beauty at 20 might be treated very differently at 50. A man's physical strength could decline. Hair could become gray. Skin could wrinkle. Teeth could be lost. This made youth particularly valuable. Youth was not simply beautiful. It was temporary. And temporary things often become more precious because they do not last. The medieval fear of aging. People have always looked for ways to delay aging. Medieval people were no different. They used various preparations and remedies. Some were intended to improve skin. Others were intended to improve hair. Some were associated with health. But none could stop time. Aging remained one of the few things no person could negotiate with.
Kings aged. Queens aged.
Farmers aged. Merchants aged. Everyone eventually became older. Beauty could delay the appearance of age only for a while. The beauty of wisdom. But age did not necessarily mean ugliness. Older people could be respected for wisdom. A gray-haired person could represent experience. A wrinkled face could tell a story. In religious art, older figures could be portrayed with dignity. So medieval culture did not have only one attitude toward aging. Youth was admired, but age could carry authority. The two ideas could exist together. The candle burns lower. Now the candle has become very small. The room is almost completely dark. The people we have been imagining have disappeared into their own homes. The noblewoman has removed her jewelry. The villager has finished her work. The merchant has closed his shop. The servant has completed the final task of the evening. Everyone is becoming ordinary again. Without clothing. Without jewelry. Without social performance. Just people. And perhaps that is the most interesting part of studying beauty in the past. We begin with faces and clothing, but eventually we arrive at something deeper. Human beings want to be seen. They want to be accepted. They want to belong. They want to be admired. They want to feel attractive. They want to feel worthy. The medieval world expressed these desires differently, but the desires themselves remain familiar. The medieval night. The town is silent now. The wooden doors are closed. The candles are disappearing one by one. The smell of smoke lingers in the air. The stars are visible above the rooftops. There are no electric lights covering the streets. No cars. No glowing signs. No screens. Only darkness. And somewhere in that darkness, medieval people are sleeping. Perhaps someone is dreaming about tomorrow's work. Perhaps someone is dreaming about love. Perhaps someone is worried about money. Perhaps someone is thinking about a beautiful person they saw earlier that day. Perhaps someone is simply exhausted. History becomes very quiet at night. The names of kings disappear. The battles become distant. The castles become shadows. And what remains are ordinary human lives. Lives that were once just as immediate and important to the people living them as ours are to us. A final thought for tonight. Beauty standards can seem strange when we look at them from the present. A high forehead, pale skin, elaborate head coverings, golden hair, expensive dyes, perfumed clothing. delicate hands, fine fabrics. But our own beauty standards will probably seem just as strange someday. Perhaps someone hundreds of years from now will look at our photographs and wonder why we styled our hair in certain ways, why we wore particular clothes, why we admired certain body shapes, why we spent so much time changing our faces, why we cared about photographs. And perhaps they will laugh gently at us. That is perfectly fine, because beauty has never been permanent. It belongs to its time. And medieval beauty belonged to a world of castles, villages, candles, churches, markets, and long roads. A world that has now disappeared. But for a few moments tonight, we have allowed it to return. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly. One face, one dress, one comb, one candle, one forgotten evening at a time. And now, the candle finally goes out. The room becomes dark. The medieval town disappears. The beauty standards disappear with it. And the past becomes still. Rest now. There is nothing left to prepare, nothing left to prove. The night is quiet, and the old world can sleep. Medieval beauty standards were stranger than you think. Boring history for sleep. Part 5. The medieval night continues. The candle has gone out in one house, then another. Across the town, small points of light are slowly disappearing. The people who were awake only a short while ago are now sleeping. And yet, history has a strange habit of continuing even when nobody is watching. Tomorrow morning, the same streets will fill again. The same doors will open. The same footsteps will return. And people will once again begin the quiet work of living. Some will wash their faces. Some will comb their hair. Some will put on their best clothes. And some will simply pull on whatever garment they own and begin working. Beauty, like almost everything else in medieval life, depended greatly on who you were. So tonight, let us look more closely at the people who lived outside the castles and royal courts. The ordinary people, the villagers, the workers, the merchants, and the women whose names were never written into history. Beauty without a castle. Most medieval people did not live in castles. They lived in villages, small towns, farms, and modest houses. Their homes were usually practical rather than luxurious. There might be a fireplace, a wooden table, simple beds, storage containers,
Tools, clothing,
perhaps a few personal objects. A mirror would not necessarily be an ordinary possession. And there would certainly not be a separate room dedicated entirely to beauty. Beauty had to fit into everyday life. A woman could not spend hours preparing her appearance if there was bread to make, water to carry, animals to feed, children to care for, and work waiting outside. So ordinary beauty was often practical. Clean hands, combed hair,
neat clothing,
a washed face. Perhaps a pleasant-smelling herb. Small things. But small things can make a large difference. The beauty of clean linen. One of the most important materials for personal cleanliness was linen. Linen could be worn close to the body. Unlike heavy wool, it could be washed more easily. This made it useful for clothing that came into direct contact with the skin. Imagine waking up in a medieval house. The air is cool. The floor is hard. There is no central heating. You dress in layers. The inner layer is lighter. The outer clothing is heavier. And that outer clothing might not be washed nearly as often. Instead, the cleaner inner fabric helps protect the body. This system was not glamorous, but it was practical. And practical solutions often matter more than beautiful ones. The importance of water. Water was precious. A modern person can turn on a faucet without thinking about where the water came from. For medieval people, water was much more visible. It had to be collected,
carried, stored,
and sometimes filtered or heated. A person might walk to a well, fill a container, carry it back, then repeat the process. This could become exhausting. Imagine doing that every day. Now imagine needing enough water for cooking,
drinking, cleaning,
washing clothing, washing people, and caring for animals. Suddenly, a simple bath becomes a major household project. This is one reason medieval cleanliness cannot be judged by modern standards. People had different resources, and they had to use those resources carefully. The medieval washing routine. A complete bath was not the only form of washing. People could wash their hands, clean their faces, wash their feet, clean particular parts of the body, use cloths, and change clothing. A person could therefore maintain a reasonable level of cleanliness without having a modern-style shower every morning. The idea that someone must either be completely clean or completely dirty is a modern oversimplification. Medieval cleanliness existed on a spectrum, and different people lived at different points on that spectrum. The smell of wool. Wool was essential to medieval life. It was warm, durable, and widely available in many parts of Europe. But wool could also hold smells. Imagine wearing the same heavy garment repeatedly. It protects you from cold weather. You work in it. You walk in it. You sit near fires in it. You travel in it. Eventually, it carries the smell of everyday life. Cleaning such garments was not always easy, so people relied partly on inner layers and ventilation. A garment could be aired outside. It could be brushed. It could be shaken. And sometimes it could be washed. But heavy clothing was never as easy to clean as modern machine-washable fabric. Fragrance as comfort. This explains why fragrance could be so appealing. A small amount of pleasant scent could make a person or a room feel more comfortable. Herbs could be placed around living spaces. Flowers could be used. Scented oils could be applied. Fragrant water could be used in certain contexts. For wealthy people, imported ingredients could create more luxurious fragrances. For ordinary people, local herbs and flowers could provide simpler alternatives. The difference between classes was often not whether they wanted pleasant smells. It was what they could afford. The medieval kitchen and beauty. Beauty was also connected to food. The kitchen was not only where meals were prepared, it was also where many household ingredients could be found. Herbs,
oils,
honey,
flour,
milk,
eggs,
flowers, spices. Some of these substances could be used for purposes beyond cooking. People did not always separate food, medicine, and cosmetics into completely different categories. A plant might be eaten. Another might be brewed into a drink. Another might be applied to the skin. And another might be used to create fragrance. The household was a small laboratory. Honey and the skin. Honey was valuable. It was sweet. It could be stored. And it had many uses. Historical people sometimes used honey in medicinal and cosmetic contexts. But we should be careful about imagining medieval beauty recipes as precise modern skincare science. They were based on observation and tradition. Someone might notice that a substance felt soothing. Another person might repeat the practice. Eventually, the recipe could become part of household knowledge. Some traditions were probably useful. Others were ineffective. Some could even be harmful. The important thing is that experimentation existed. The medieval herbal tradition. Herbs were everywhere. People knew plants because they depended on them. They used herbs for food, for fragrance, for household purposes, and for medicine. Knowledge of plants could be valuable. A person who knew which plants were useful had practical knowledge. This knowledge could be passed from mother to daughter, from healer to patient, from one generation to another. Some of it was accurate. Some was based on incorrect theories. But all of it belonged to a world where people had to understand nature directly. Hair washing. Hair washing was more complicated than it is today. There was no modern shampoo. People used water and various natural substances. The exact methods varied widely. Some people may have washed their hair relatively often, others less frequently. Hair type, climate, wealth, access to water, and personal habits all mattered. And because hair could be long, drying it could take time. Imagine washing your hair in a medieval house during winter. There is no electric hair dryer, no heated bathroom, no warm towel waiting for you. You have to let it dry naturally. Suddenly, washing your hair becomes something you might plan carefully. Hair oils. Oils could be useful. They could help with dryness. They could add shine. They could make hair easier to manage. And some oils could be scented. But again, there was no standardized product sitting on a shelf. A household used what was available. The oil might come from plants. It might be mixed with herbs. And its quality could depend on how it was prepared. A wealthy person could potentially access more expensive ingredients. An ordinary person would use simpler materials. The medieval hair braid. Braiding was practical as well as attractive. Long hair becomes easier to manage when braided. A braid keeps hair together. It reduces tangling. It can be tucked under a head covering. And it can also look beautiful. This is another recurring theme in history. Practical things often become fashionable. A style begins because it is useful. Then people decorate it. Then society decides it looks elegant. Eventually, it becomes part of beauty culture. The beauty of modesty. For many medieval women, covering the hair could be part of respectable appearance. The head covering did not necessarily make a woman less beautiful. It could become part of beauty itself. Different fabrics, different shapes, different arrangements, different decorations. A simple veil could be practical. A more elaborate headpiece could be luxurious. In this way, beauty moved from the hair to the clothing surrounding it. The fabric became part of the frame around the face. And framing the face has always been an important part of fashion. The medieval face frame. Today, people use hairstyles, makeup, and accessories to frame the face. Medieval people did something similar. A head covering could emphasize the forehead. A hairstyle could make the face look longer or rounder. Jewelry could draw attention toward the neck. A collar could change the apparent shape of the face. Clothing can create visual illusions. People understood this without knowing modern fashion theory. They simply noticed what looked good. Beauty and light. Candlelight also changed appearance. This is easy to forget. Medieval people did not see themselves under bright white electric bulbs. Their indoor world was often illuminated by candles, lamps, fireplaces, and daylight. Warm, flickering light softens details. It changes shadows. It changes colors. And it can make faces look different. Imagine looking at someone beside a candle. Their features are partly hidden by darkness. The skin appears warmer. The eyes catch the light. The rest of the room disappears. Beauty in candlelight could be almost theatrical. Beauty at night. Evening gatherings could therefore have a special atmosphere. People wearing fine clothing would appear differently under candlelight. Jewelry could catch small flashes of light. Rich fabric could look deeper. Perfume could linger in the warm air. The room might be dark around the edges, and people could become more conscious of one another. The medieval night was not simply dark. It had its own kind of beauty, a quieter beauty, a slower beauty, one that modern electric light has largely erased. The beauty of voice. Physical appearance was not the only form of attraction. Voice mattered too. A pleasant voice could be considered charming. A gentle way of speaking could create a good impression. In medieval literature, beautiful women were sometimes described not only by their faces, but by their voices. This reminds us that attraction is never entirely visual. People notice movement, speech, manners,
smell, clothing,
and personality. Even medieval beauty standards were more complicated than a list of facial features. The beauty of manners. A person could be physically attractive but socially unpleasant. That was not necessarily considered ideal. At court, manners were extremely important. Knowing how to speak, how to greet, how to sit,
how to eat,
how to behave around people of higher status.
all of these things mattered.
Graceful behavior could enhance physical beauty. A person who moved elegantly could appear more attractive. So beauty was partly performance. The beautiful walk. Movement itself could become part of appearance. A person who walked confidently could seem more impressive. A person who carried themselves gracefully could appear refined.
Posture mattered.
Clothing also affected movement. Long garments could require careful walking. Elaborate sleeves could change how someone used their arms. Heavy fabrics could influence posture. Beauty, therefore, existed not only in still images. It existed in motion. Beauty and the horse. For medieval nobles, even transportation could become part of appearance. A beautiful horse was valuable. A well-trained horse communicated wealth and status. A rider dressed in fine clothing on a carefully equipped horse could make an enormous impression. The beauty belonged partly to the person and partly to everything around them.
Horse,
Clothing,
jewelry,
weapons, servants. All of these things created an image. The medieval elite understood presentation. The beautiful household. A wealthy person's appearance was also supported by their environment. A fine house, beautiful furniture, decorated rooms, expensive fabrics, fine tableware, servants. Everything contributed to an impression. This is why medieval beauty cannot be separated from luxury. A person's appearance existed inside a larger visual world. A beautiful woman wearing expensive clothing in a decorated hall created a completely different impression from the same woman standing in a muddy field. Context matters. Beauty and the poor. But what about poor people? Their beauty was often invisible to historians. They did not leave behind portraits. Their clothing was not preserved in magnificent collections. Their beauty routines were rarely written down. But that does not mean they did not care about appearance. A young village woman might take pride in her hair. A young man might want to look handsome before meeting someone he liked. A family might save money for better clothing for a wedding. Someone might wash carefully before attending church. These small moments were important to the people experiencing them. History simply did not record most of them. The beauty of a Sunday. Religious gatherings could provide an opportunity to dress well. Imagine a medieval village on a special day. People have finished preparing. The church bell rings. Families leave their homes. The streets become busier. People wear their better clothing. Hair is arranged. Children are cleaned. Adults try to look respectable. For some, this might be one of the few times during the week when appearance becomes especially important. It is a social event. People see one another. They notice changes. They notice new clothes. They notice who is absent. And, naturally, they notice who looks good. Beauty and marriage prospects. In a small community, appearance could influence romantic relationships. A young person might be considered attractive. Their family might be respected. Their clothing might suggest prosperity. Their behavior might suggest good character. All of these details could influence how others viewed them. Marriage was not simply about romance, but romance still existed. People still fell in love. People still experienced attraction. People still became nervous around someone they admired. That part of human history is easy to imagine. The medieval crush. Imagine being young in a medieval village. You see someone at church. You see them at the market. Perhaps they are carrying water. Perhaps they are helping their family. You notice their hair, their smile, their clothing, the way they speak. Maybe you see them again the next day. And then again. Nothing has changed about human attraction. Only the setting has changed. There are no text messages, no social media, no dating apps, but there are glances, small conversations, family connections, and the hope that someone else might feel the same way. Beauty before the first meeting. If a person knew they were going to meet someone important, they might prepare. The clothing would be checked. Hair would be combed, hands washed, perhaps fragrance used. A person might want to look their best. This is not a medieval invention. It is simply human. Before important social moments, people prepare themselves. The medieval version just used fewer products. The beauty of simplicity. Not everyone wanted an elaborate appearance. Sometimes simplicity itself could be admired. Plain but clean clothing, neat hair, a calm expression, a modest manner. This could create an impression of dignity. The idea that beauty does not require excessive decoration is also very old. In some contexts, simplicity could communicate confidence. Someone who did not need to display wealth might appear more refined. Again, beauty was about balance. When fashion went too far. But fashion can always go too far. At different points in medieval history, people complained about extravagant clothing. Too much fabric. Too much jewelry. Too much decoration. Too much money spent on appearance. Moralists could criticize luxury, but people continued to enjoy it. That tension appears throughout history. Society says, "Do not be vain." And then society creates another beautiful fashion. People say they dislike excess. Then they admire someone wearing something expensive. Human beings are wonderfully inconsistent. Beauty and memory. Clothing could also preserve memories. A dress might be associated with a wedding, a ring with a parent, a cloak with a particular journey, a necklace with a marriage. A piece of fabric might be passed from one generation to another. Beauty could therefore become connected with family history. The object was beautiful because it looked good, but it was also beautiful because of what it meant. The final hours before dawn. Now imagine the medieval night slowly moving toward morning. The darkness is beginning to change. Not yet daylight. Just the faintest suggestion that the night will eventually end. Inside the houses, people remain asleep. Their clothing is folded nearby. The comb rests on a table. A small container of oil sits untouched. The jewelry has been placed away. The perfume has faded. And the faces that were carefully prepared earlier are now completely ordinary. No one is performing beauty in sleep. No one needs to impress anyone. The body simply rests. And perhaps this is where beauty finally becomes unnecessary. The quiet lesson. We have spent hours exploring what medieval people considered attractive. Pale skin, long hair, fine clothing, elegant posture, youth, health, pleasant fragrance, social status. But perhaps the most interesting discovery is that beauty was never simply about physical appearance. It was about identity. It was about class. It was about wealth. It was about religion. It was about relationships. It was about reputation. And ultimately, it was about being seen.
That has not changed.
The world around us is different. Our mirrors are clearer. Our cosmetics are more advanced. Our clothing is produced faster. Our photographs are everywhere. But the human desire behind all of it remains remarkably old. We still want to look good. We still want people to notice us. We still compare ourselves with others. We still follow trends. We still change our appearance. And we still worry about whether someone finds us attractive. Perhaps medieval people would recognize that immediately. Good night, medieval world. The night is almost over. The candle is gone. The houses are dark. The streets are still. The medieval world is waiting for morning. Soon someone will wake. A fire will be started. Water will be carried. Bread will be prepared. Hair will be combed. Clothing will be put on. And another ordinary day will begin. The beauty routines will return. The social rules will return. The work will return. But for now, there is only silence. The old wooden houses rest beneath the night sky. The castles stand in darkness. The fields are quiet. The roads are empty. And somewhere, a person who lived hundreds of years ago is sleeping peacefully. They do not know that one day, people will look back at their world. They do not know that their clothing will become museum pieces. Their beauty recipes will become historical curiosities. Their fashions will become subjects of books. They are simply living, just as we are. And perhaps that is why history can be so calming. Every person who ever lived believed, at least for a moment, that their own ordinary day mattered.
And it did.
Even if their name was forgotten, even if their face was never painted, even if no one remembers what they looked like, they were here. They lived. They worked. They loved. They worried. They laughed. And sometimes they looked into a small reflection and wondered whether they were beautiful. That is enough. The medieval night is quiet now. Let the streets fade. Let the castles disappear. Let the candlelight become a memory. And let the old world rest. For tonight, we can rest with it.